When my old theology school professor, Tom Mullins, learned that I had once been the director of a Sunday school, he made a confession to me. He said, "Whenever I teach Sunday school, there are always two kids I want to kick out of the class so that I can teach the others about the unconditional love of God." This morning, I want to talk about excommunication, which is just a big word for when you have that impulse to kick some kids out of the class or kick members out of your church. To use contemporary language, the word excommunication could be seen just as a big ecclesiastical word for when the church unfriends you. In some traditions, excommunication might just mean a refusal to give you certain services or sacraments. For instance, in some traditions, if you've been divorced, you may be welcome to come to church, but you can't have communion or you can't be remarried by the church. So excommunication is partial. In other traditions, excommunication is total. Your name is taken off membership rolls. You can't attend services. You can no longer speak to family or friends who are part of that faith tradition. You are ostracized. You are well and truly kicked out of the club. Throughout most of Western church history, excommunication has been a one-way street. It's been the church that has excommunicated the individual, not vice versa. But something happened during the Protestant Reformation with its affirmation of the worth and dignity and authority of every person and the priesthood of every believer. Something happened in that transformation in the dignity of human beings. Before the Reformation, the church might judge, condemn, and excommunicate someone. Now someone might judge, condemn, and excommunicate the church itself. This week, I am teaching an adult Sunday school class on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock called MLK 50. It is around the teachings of King, particularly around his last year, and this is the 50th anniversary of his assassination. One of the teachers in that class is the Reverend Johnny Skinner of the Mount Zion Baptist Church. And his church was founded in 1860 when African American members of First Baptist Church downtown decided to walk out because they decided they were tired of being treated like second-class citizens in their own church. And so they formed their own congregation, Mount Zion Baptist Church. They were not excommunicated by the church, they excommunicated the church. Those kinds of stories may seem long ago, the 19th century, or stories from the Reformation, but there are many other stories that are more current. This week I was reading in the Maryville Daily Times about a couple in Blount County who were told that they could not be members of a church even though they had been attending and volunteering for some time. They had been baptized, they had gone through the membership class, and they had signed a pledge form and made the contribution to the church, but then the pastor met with them and said that they could not join the church because they were a same-sex couple. I do not know what the couple will do now. Maybe like Martin Luther, they'll start their own tradition, or maybe they'll join another church like the Foothills Unitarian Universalist Fellowship that we helped launch in Blount County, or maybe they'll walk through the doors of this church. For as the scriptures say, the stone that the builders rejected will be the cornerstone of our church. That's how we build. Our church is built on the worth and dignity of every person. That is our foundation. This morning I have been talking about excommunication, which may seem a little strange as we are welcoming our newest members. Maybe they're getting a little bit nervous right now. But another reason it might seem strange is we don't have a rite of excommunication. As William Ellery Channing, who founded the American Unitarian Association, said, "No one can be excommunicated from this church except by the death of goodness in his or her own heart." However, just because our church doesn't excommunicate people doesn't mean people can't excommunicate us. Over the years, I've met a number of people who used to go to our church who have decided to walk out we did not excommunicate them, they excommunicated us. And because we believe we can learn from all people in every walks of life, it's worth paying attention to some of these lessons. Here are at least three. I know there are more. Here are at least three reasons why people walk out of church. They're not just exclusively this church. It could be a reason people walk out of other congregations as well. The number one reason is rudeness. And one of the things that I have in my own personal story is when I was a young adult, I was visiting a church of another faith tradition, shopping around for my own church home, when I was approached by somebody in the coffee hour who said, "So, what do you do for a living?" And I said, "Well, I'm in social work." And then he said, "Oh, we have too many of those already." Now, I walked out of that church and I never went back, but upon reflection, I learned something important. It took me a couple of decades to get it. I didn't judge that church by anything the minister said. I didn't judge the church by anything the liturgy said. I didn't judge the church by anything the lyrics of the hymn said. I judged that church by something one random individual said to me in the coffee hour. And I lift this up because I think it's important for us to remember whenever any one of us is visiting or we meet a new person in the church or even an older member, we are the church. We are not just an individual. When we're rude, the church is rude. When we're irritable, the church is irritable. When we're loving and kind, the church is loving and kind. And so we need to be committed for that shared ministry because each one of us is the church and each one of us has to work together. We want this to be a loving and kind church, so let's work together for that goal. Are you in? All right. Number two. Sometimes people leave the church because they're offended. And I once gave a sermon and I watched two people walk out in the middle of the sermon because they were offended by what I said, and I later tried to reach them through email, but they never ever came back to the church again. And so what I've learned from that is some personal, introspection is that I need to be very careful in communicating to everyone who might be listening to me that when I say something inflammatory from this pulpit, I'm not trying to chase you out of the church. I'm trying to keep you awake. I'm trying to stimulate thought. I'm trying to provoke discussion. I am trying to awaken the conscience so that we can be in community together and talk together. Now, when I first joined the UU Church, I was a new member. People asked me why I joined the UU Church. And I said, well, in this denomination, I'm sometimes offended, I'm sometimes shocked, I'm sometimes surprised, but I'm never bored. I'm never bored. And I think that's an important thing, that we create a congregation that isn't boring. Once again, I do believe it takes us working together to create a congregation that isn't boring. I don't know if many of you remember the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, who got in a whole bunch of trouble in the national media for giving very powerful and sometimes inflammatory sermons. That he had a member of his congregation who was a future president, Obama at the time. Anyhow, one of the things, he was totally misrepresented in the media, but one of the things that was important, I had heard him preach before, one of the things I knew about him and actually share with him is that he is a provocateur. He's a provocateur. He's about stimulating thought. He's about stimulating your mind, about stimulating how you think. And I'd heard him give other sermons, so I knew there was more provocation there that they hadn't even discovered yet. Once when he was speaking to the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association, a gathering of Unitarian Universalists all, he looked at us and said, "You Unitarian Universalists believe in reason and rationality, but have you ever known someone to have a rational orgasm?" Well, Jim McKinley was sitting next to me and he looked around the room and then he whispered in my ear, "Some people in this room have." I tell this story because sometimes it's the provocative statement that leads to self-awareness, the provocative statement that helps us grow. So let's work together to create a congregation where sometimes we're shocked, sometimes we're surprised, and sometimes we're offended, but we're never bored. Are you in with that? Yes. Number 3, another reason people leave the Unitarian Universalist Church, and this is pretty unique to our tradition, or at least I've heard it more with our tradition than others. Sometimes it's said that we're better explaining what we don't believe than what we do believe. And the story goes of a newcomer comes to a Unitarian Universalist church, and there's a group of Unitarian Universalists, so she asks, what do Unitarian Universalists believe? And someone takes on the role of spokesperson for the group, of course, and says, well, we don't believe in a literal interpretation of the scriptures, and we don't believe in the traditional sacraments of the church, and we don't believe in eternal damnation and hellfire. And she interrupts and says, I don't know, I didn't ask you what you don't believe, I asked what you do believe. And the group of people look around at each other and all of a sudden say in unison, Black Lives Matter. I tell this story because we often are, and I include myself in this, often we are more articulate about our political beliefs than our religious ones. But if you pay attention, you will notice that undergirding these political beliefs, there is religious values, spiritual values. For as the Apostle James said, how can I love God who I have not seen if I cannot love a brother or a sister or a neighbor who I have seen? In the UU Church, loving people we can see has always taken precedence over speculation over what is unseen. An anonymous poet once wrote, I sought my soul, but my soul I could not see. I sought my God, but my God eluded me. I sought my brother or sister or neighbor and found all three. Or as the lyricist of Les Miserables once wrote, to love another person is to see the face of God. Theology in action is about loving one another. Theology in action is about loving the person we can see so that we are in alignment with all that is unseen. So let's work together to make that kind of ministry a shared ministry here. Are you in? Yes. So as I bring this sermon to a close, let us remember to always prioritize loving those who we can see over conjecture about the unseen. Let us remember to have a positive message for the world. Let us keep our focus on our affirmations more than our negations. Let us focus on what we do believe and not just what we don't believe. Let's remember that when we greet new people, we are the church. Say that, we are the church. Our negative thoughts may or may not stand the test of time. Our negations may prove ephemeral and peripheral, but there are affirmations that will hold us up and serve us well. So let's do our best to align our lives with the power of the unseen that undergirds our efforts at unconditional love. When we say love is the spirit of this church, let's really mean it. Let's build a church where there will be truth for our minds, good works for our hands, love for our hearts. And we can say an affirmation of Theodore Parker's words that he first said in the 19th century. And I give these as kind of an insight into my own mind because whenever I'm engaged in negative thinking or a loop, I use these words to sort of cast out fear and cast out negativity and have an affirmation. As he said so many years ago, be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love, its profession of faith, divine living. Can I get an amen? Amen. Amen.
Please turn in your hymnals to number 287 and rise in body or spirit as we sing together.